I had recently seen, I hadn't seen this particular article, but recently I read a different article about fact checking and why it what does and doesn't work. I
So
thought that was interesting.
I don't know why I decided to kind of look for one. It was just something that to me seemed like an interesting thing to look for today. And then uh, ended up after I kind of scanned over it, it's like this might be worth talking about. Um, because I've had plenty of discussions about fact checking in general, kind of at a high level. You know, is it effective? Is it ineffective? Etc. Without really diving into it, just general musings, I guess, if you will. And and so, especially in the wake of recent administration and changes and everything else, and
Oof.
company changes and all, it was genuinely something that's just like, you know, that's something maybe I want to search for real quick and just see. And so it is kind of funny that it was interesting enough to at least put in as a potential topic. Um, but I don't really know how much I have to say about it either. You know, it's one of those topics where it's almost like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's certainly a place for fact checking to exist, and that fact checking, I would say, it's certainly not in the right places at the moment. And but one of the good places that it does exist is that somebody who's seeking out the truth. So it's recently, I, you know, I think it's like, I don't know, you'll see a headline somewhere, and it doesn't matter if it's social media or a reputable source. You just look at that headline and be like, I don't know if that's real or not. Not because it's like on the line of what is expected versus unexpected. It's just that the line of expected versus unexpected is no longer a line, and it's kind of a pretty big box. And you read a headline, and it's just, that could be fake, but it could be real, and I just don't know. And you go and you look and you try to verify. Uh, Recently, I'd seen somebody post something about Space Carrion was he's dismantling the federal government from within, and I saw that basically employees that manage the national nuclear stockpile were all fired and sent home. And I'm like, I read that headline. I'm like, it could be real, or it could be, fear mongering. And I go and I look it up. Oh, it really happened. And so um, it's not. The least places that it needs to be is, oh, somebody wants to know, is this thing real or not? Where it really needs to be, where it's most critical, is in front of anyone who's out there spreading information. It should be not just a goal, but it should be everything that is possible should be applied to avoiding the spread of misinformation. And then when you have an unelected, I don't know, sycophant, the right word? I'm not sure if it's the right word in this context, but it's definitely the right word in some context.
The I think
what is
the
the word I'm
one
looking for?
Well, I think sycophant works fine. But then again, there are plenty of words that you could choose and apply to the particular people involved that I would have no qualms with. So, but what I was going to say is one of the things I really wish we saw more of was something like, are you familiar with ground news?
Yes.
So the way they report leanings of stories, I really wish we had something like that for factual versus non-factual. Like, does this trend toward factual as far as the reporting goes, or is this very clearly opinion or not evidence based? You know, it's something that gives you a better feel for, should I read it with a little bit of skepticism, or should I just read it for purely entertainment purposes. Not necessarily because I think fact checking itself is problematic or not problematic, but because I think we've seen very clearly that on ideas that are very either polarizing or very strong emotional attachments by people, that fact checking is just irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Where I think if you had something that gave you which direction a particular article leaned, like does this lean more toward being truthful and transparent, or does it lean more toward trying to evoke a reaction, that maybe that would help get through. Yeah, maybe that would help get through to people more than just fact checking.
Yeah. So well, so Space Karen was in the Oval Office, and he was basically asked, like, how accurate.
Yeah, I know where this is going.
Yeah. How accurate? Basically asked, how accurate are you in what you say? And he's like, oh, I'm not batting 1,000, and just was like, yeah, it doesn't. It just felt very much like, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't even have to hide it. Like, there's no, I'm not batting 1,000. I'm not going to tell you everything correctly. I will I will say things incorrectly, and there was no integrity to attempt to be truthful.
It was the most infuriating response you could have.
Yeah. So it's big. I think it's a significant problem, and where you live in a place where we're just gonna let people get, the majority of people are gonna be, I don't even know if it's okay with it, but indifferent enough towards it that it's how we got here. It's one of the reasons we got here. When you mentioned Ground News, I found that site to be really interesting for the reasons that you mentioned. But I think even on top of that, it's like, I want to know who are your corporate ties, because like the news industry is difficult to begin with, and I feel like it's been increasingly more difficult since the 90s. And what's actual investigative journalism is difficult, time-consuming, and expensive. So that's what we get the least of. Reporting on somebody tweeting a thing, real simple, and it gets a lot of clicks, and that makes money. So I think the political bias isn't nearly as important as the what corporations are we never going to show in a negative light. How much of this we're using clickbait to generate revenue, and those are the things that I started to think about recently.
And the corporation angle is an interesting one to ponder. I would even expand it to maybe what interest groups
yes,
as well,
yes.
Not just the corporation.
I think you're right to expand that, yeah.
And that's not something I had specifically considered, but it would make a lot of sense.
And this, yeah, I was going to say, this is nothing new in our day and age. This has existed since the beginning of reporting news. This is clickbait is just the term that we use for it today. It used to be something else when you had newsboys shouting extra, extra. But that's just kind of a tangent to what this particular article that you linked to was discussing, and that is fact-checking important or not important, effective? And I guess what I was alluding to, or not alluding to, but dancing around, was that it's important for the person who wants to know the facts. But as I understand it, and I expect this article has articulated this, is when you try to change somebody's mind with facts, it usually backfires.
Yeah, so the article does make mention of the more polarizing or divisive the topic, the less it tends to be effective. And part of that is also just related to the spread of the information. The more polarizing or divisive something is, the more likely it is to spread faster. And so trying to be at the front of that spread with fact checking. It's where it is most effective, but it's still just not that effective. Most people just don't care when it's something that they feel that emotionally charged about. And it goes really with the things that we've said numerous times before about how we, in general, humanity tends to seek those things that reaffirm what we want to reaffirm. You live in an echo chamber and that gives you some level of reaffirmation that your opinions are correct, and you can either stay there and just believe you're correct, or you can actually take the effort and process of figuring out alternative viewpoints and just making sure you understand all of the different things, and most people don't.
I know I've mentioned on this show more than once a day of the year calendar that I had with sayings on the one that has I had this when I was in high school, so this is probably almost 30 years old, but what has stuck with me from that calendar is that the phrase, "It's easier to jump to conclusions than it is to dig for facts." And that really resonated with me as a teenager, and it has stayed with me since. And I was recently reading some things about confirmation bias and how there's a subset of confirmation bias that occurs when you try to convince somebody of your position on something using objectively or relatively irrefutable facts, you might say, and it creates something called the backfire effect, where somebody they hear these facts and they become more entrenched in their views because it is an attack. It's perceived, or whether consciously or subconsciously perceived, as an attack on their identity, and the person becomes more entrenched in their views because they are, as a defense mechanism. And that's what when I looked at this article, saw this the subject or the title of this article. That's where my mind went. It was this backfire effect.
There's another name for it, isn't there?
There might be, and it's escaping me if there is.
I think so.
I think there's a better name for it.
And it's something that I know I've encountered variations of that in different conversations where it feels like it's very specifically that particular issue, maybe manifesting itself from the standpoint of the other person. And it's interesting because it's almost a transition to defiance that it's almost like the person is saying, I can prove to you that you're wrong and that my view is right just because you can't convince me otherwise. Like it's a very much a delusional kind of state from an argument perspective. And I think it's why you have so many quotes about not arguing with different types of people, because you either you can't. I'm at a loss for the quotes, but there are so many different sayings that are surrounding this particular phenomenon. The only one that keeps coming to mind is that if you not to argue with I think it's not to argue with a stupid person because you'll stoop to their level and still lose, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
But it's that type of thing where it's not even, and I don't mean to imply that someone holding on to a belief is stupid either. It's just that there's a point where logic and understanding go out the window. Normally, we talk about it with regard to ideological philosophies and things that people have really wrapped into or interpreted as a part of who they are. For example, the label of a religious person, or a particular political ideology or group or something of that nature. And the moment that they are faced with something that is not desirable, that is factual, that it's attached to that group, it's either ignored or downplayed or justified in a way that makes it not be a problem for them, and then redirected into almost a fervent, I know I'm right because type of mentality. I don't know. Maybe I may
No,
be
no,
kind of
uh,
long-winded in my talking around it, but it's an interesting thing, and I've heard it referred to by some other name, and I just can't think of the other name.
was maybe belief perseverance.
Maybe that sounds
I feel like
sounds
I feel
similar.
like I feel like there's a better one that I've heard as well, but I think it's one of those things. It's like I think you have to think about or think in the context of the person. They weren't asking for a new truth, and that being that they weren't assuming that what they believed was untrue. Because if they truly felt that it was untrue, or if the idea of this particular thought or belief or position or worldview was untrue to the importance of questioning it, they would have already done that themselves. Now, whether or not they would have been successful is neither here nor there, but they've become comfortable with their set of beliefs, and if they were uncomfortable with them, they would. I mean, even the I think almost everybody would search for what it is that does make them comfortable. Unfortunately, most people are comfortable with their beliefs because they were instilled in them at a very young age, whether they are right or wrong, and that it's become historical, you could say, for that person. Whereas, when something starts to become problematic, they begin to search, and whether or not they're successful in that search, again, neither here nor there. But they would already be searching for it, and they'd be open to it. So then, when somebody like me is a little asshole and says, "Hey, here's why you're wrong," because everybody loves to hear that phrase. Not that I actually say it that way, but that's that. I might as well, one might as well say, "Oh, here's how you're wrong," and then you provide them with a few facts or a lot of facts. It's however many facts that you've provided. It's that many facts that they weren't asking you for, because they've already accepted what they currently believe to be true. Now, I think there are ways to not manipulate people into being open to the truth, but just creating rapport with a person to earn a place to talk about something that's different than their current worldview. And that, just like investigative journalism, it's a lot of hard work. It takes a long time, and it's not easy.
It's a good way to look at it. I as you were talking through it, one of the things that kept coming to mind is how often do you hear stories where someone actually had a fairly strong belief, and not even going to say that it was definitively strong, just something that you knew, you could equate this belief with this person, and found them to change it to something else. Like just the act of changing a relatively held belief. Like how often do you actually come across that?
Not often.
And I think that that's part of why we look at it as such a novel thing, even though we shouldn't. I think part of why it is so fascinating is I don't know many people who have the approach that I have in this particular space, where I have strong beliefs for sure, but I tend to always be looking for alternative, not necessarily alternative beliefs, but alternative viewpoints to reassess those beliefs. And that's something that is not common.
It's quite uncommon. It's funny. I think we both separately went through some training that really helps if you were wanting to reach out to somebody about the truth, and I think that help is, but Apple Steps of Service really good for that.
Yeah.
And as corny as I really felt they were super corny, but and there was something that I knew I watched some people do, and they just seem so fake, presenting in that way. But if you can really make that kind of system work for you, I think it's highly effective. I recently had a conversation with a neighbor of mine who uh, is my best guess is conservative, uh, has or holds to more conservative values than I do, and unintentionally, I'm not even sure that they're ironic about that. But what I have found with speaking to uh, people who are politically far more conservative than me is that the difference between that person's beliefs and who they are is not as different from me as we each of us are to our government. I know there was an Iranian artist that said it succinctly, and I do not remember the quote, but it was basically to the extent of like the difference between you and me is much smaller than the difference between your government and you and my government and me. And I really found that to be really a great icebreaker, because I haven't met a single person who didn't disagree with me on that. And then the second thing I like to talk about with folks that believe differently than me politically is that we both want the same thing. We just have some of the details are different, but the thing that we both want is an end to corruption. I haven't met, again, this is another thing. I haven't met a single person who disagreed with me about corruption. And then the next place I go is that it exists on both sides. There are good actors on both sides, and there are too many bad actors going unchecked on both sides. And then I like to throw Nancy Pelosi under the bus, because it's unconscionable that she has a net worth of $200 million, over $200 million when she started Congress. Started in Congress, a few decades ago, with barely a fraction of that. And then I talk about, and I've said this to you before, but it's like, it's bad when somebody as liberal as me is agreeing with Josh Hawley, Senator Hawley. So yeah, we want the same things. And then you talk, then you can talk about, it's like, at that point, it's not at all difficult for somebody to swallow the idea that we live in a corporate oligarchy, and that, it doesn't matter the popularity of a bill, whether it is 100% of the population wants it or 0% of the population wants it. It's got a 30% chance of passing, versus if there's corporate interest groups that want it to pass, it has a 50% chance of passing. Like those couple of things, it's just like, it's really easy to get to that point where we're agreeing on all of these things, despite our being on polar ends of a political spectrum. I haven't met a single person who disagreed with me on any of that, or at least to my face.
No, I don't think you would find many people who would.
No, I don't think so.
I know many, excuse me, I know many of the things that I've seen, both just reading and in general discussion, day to day, if you look at anybody around you, there's not a huge divide like it is portrayed most of the time. There are extremes, sure, but it's not the average person. The average person just has either a kind of a hyper-focused attention on government and very strong opinions on all of the different things, or they have one or two things that they really pay attention to, and the rest of it is just noise. And they tend to not investigate the noise, and that's really the big problem. Because most of them, if one or two issues weren't specifically the problematic areas, most of them, if they encountered some of the other things in that noise, beforehand, or really recognized that noise for what it was, their opinion tends to change. And you hear it often with people who, after an election, will say, well, if I'd realized this, or if I'd understood X, Y, or Z, I'm pretty sure it would have influenced how I did things. And so it's another way of viewing that same kind of similarity, I guess, that you're referring to in the conversation, because most people genuinely do want other people to be treated with compassion and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand some of the policy actions and choices and those ramifications outside of the scope of how someone has decided to spin it for their gain.
Right, right. I think, the other important thing is to find, after you find common ground, is to put yourself in a position of instead of here are the facts and, hitting people over the head with a fact stick, is to ask them to tell you what they understand. And then, when you start asking questions, if it's, something, if it's the right, in the right context, when you're asking questions, you can ask a lot of really good leading questions. And because most people do like to talk, because when you talk, it's about, it's you're self-promoting. And if you're asking good questions about that other person's beliefs, and you can ask them to tell you, hey, I don't understand, when you say, I think that public drag shows should be banned because we need to protect the children. It's like, okay, I can see you have a concern for children, and and if you think the government has a responsibility to do that, I agree with you that they do have a responsibility to protect children. But it's like, what is the most dangerous thing to children today? It's certainly not drag shows. And this is where you might lose somebody, but if you get them questioning what's the most dangerous thing for children today, then it's like you might be able to share a fact that doesn't, without hitting them in the head with the fact stick. And the answer is firearms. That kills more children than anything today in the United States.
And disproportionately so, if I remember the statistics correctly.
Yeah. I could follow it up with that. Nobody wants to take your guns. And this is one, you get a gun owner, a gun enthusiast, they agree with the things that they have common sense positions on gun control. Like, they truly do. I haven't met a single true gun enthusiast that doesn't believe that firearms should be stored safely and away, without, any true, without children being able to access them, and that when you take a firearm out, it should be used. It should be only taken out for use or cleaning. I guess you could consider that a tangent of use, and that every gun owner should be qualified to use their weapon. None of that, I agree with all those things, and none of them have to do with taking guns away. And it's just, what we agree is like what's permissible is really about comfort zone, because I don't know a single person that thinks that we should be allowed to have RPGs. So and the AR-15 style rifle is a red herring. It's something that's used to drum up feelings of fear among gun owners and enthusiasts, because the vast, the talking about disproportionate the killings caused by AR-15 style rifles is far fraction lower than those that are killed and injured by handguns. Like, the pistol is the most dangerous firearm available, or by statistically speaking. The reason I don't think anyone doesn't understand that the reason the AR-15 is so dangerous is because um, it gets a lot of attention because mass murders with that type of rifle um, warrant a lot of attention, whereas handgun deaths are pretty routine. Sad to say.
Yeah, it's kind of twofold. Just to piggyback on that last kind of point for emphasis, the AR is picked on for the same reason that high capacity magazines are picked on, where they look more menacing. It's you if you're trying to drive attention seeking behavior for headlines or media purposes or whatever, the AR-15 looks the part, or any assault rifle or assault styled rifle looks the part. It looks menacing. It looks threatening. You can point to it and say, "See, do you really need this?" And handguns just don't evoke that same immediate kind of visual response. We see them all the time in media or uh, just general use cases. Whereas anytime you see uh, any type of assault styled rifle, it's almost always in a like a war style
Mm-hmm.
setting, and so it's easy to invoke that emotional feeling when talking about an assault rifle in this particular context than it is to evoke the appropriate emotional response when talking about a handgun, which is actually far more prevalent and arguably, because of the easier level of concealability, far more dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um,
I know we've
I,
talked about the whole firearm enthusiast that piece before because I've on the show even have multiple times stated that of course I enjoyed firearms. I grew up around them as well, and it's fun to make things explode. Um, but I'm first proponent for much stricter regulation around who can own them, why they can own them, the effectiveness of a permit to own and carry a firearm should be tied to some licensing requirement, not just here's $20 or whatever the cost is.
oh, for sure. I think that if I don't think it's wrong to take the position of let's ban all firearms. I don't think that's a wrong position. Um, I think it's too much too fast, perhaps. And so, much like trying to um, use facts to change somebody's mind, I think it's you're going to have a similar, trying to pull that is going to give someone you're going to exhibit the backfire effect, I suspect. And whereas if you're just like, I'm just looking to understand what's going on out there, because that's right now that's our problem. Our problem is we know that people have the access to firearms is far too easy, or is far too easy, and because if it wasn't, then you wouldn't have these mass murders, and you wouldn't have the daily um, death count from firearms. So the problem I see is like we're not allowed to study it. Like uh, there's no federal money to be able to study what is actually happening and how dangerous are these. And it's there are certain groups that are preventing that from happening. They don't even want you to know what the truth is. So we're not even talking about. We don't even have. We're at a place where it's like I don't even have facts to hit you with my fact stick if I wanted to. We're not even there. And it's like, do you want to know, or do you want to not know? And if you don't want to know, I guess that's there's no real conversation to be had.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to the only person who's ever going to change is the person who chooses to do so.
Mm-hmm.
You, the the ramification being you can't make people change. People have to choose change.
That's right. I'm not sure I've got more to say about that, but there was something that you said that made me think of a thing that I heard. in this conversation.
Okay.
I've mentioned a comedian that I like is Pete Holmes, and I came across something because he's always taken. I like he's taken this position. He's like, atheists don't make. I don't know if he said it like this, but basically, atheists don't make sense. And it's because the question he asks is, so what happens when you die? And nothing. And I'm trying to remember the logic that he used. It was really clever, but it's like, I'll see if I can find it at a later time. But he recently was talking about God, and he's like, God's not like this old man in the sky, but God is a metaphor for a mystery that transcends human thought. And I was like, okay, you hooked me. I'm interested. And then he quoted Barry Taylor, and Barry Taylor was the road manager for ACDC. And he said that God is the name of the blanket that we put over the mystery to give it shape. And I was like, oh, that's interesting to me. I can dig on that. And I found that really amusing and poignant. We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap. Yeah, I remember, I don't know, 5, 8, something like that, less than a decade ago. I remember very distinctly having the recognition that global warming was the worst marketing branding ever, because it doesn't really encapsulate the way you should think about it, as opposed to the humanity's effect on climate and climate fluctuations. And so, you can fast forward to now, and you have, most of the time it talked about with regard to the more generic climate change instead of global warming being the ever-present terminology. But I very much remember having that aha moment when it kind of fit for me.
They really should always be put together, global warming as a result of climate change, but that's too much of a mouthful, and it takes too long to explain. Because as I understood it, global warming, there was some move away from the term global warming because it was too scary, and I understood it to be that that term was, or we reversed, we stopped using that term as much because of for propaganda reasons, or for reasons of propagandic reasons.
Yeah, I think I've heard that as well, or something similar enough to recognize it. I think the bigger thing from my take on it is just that when people experience, colder temperatures, it's tough to wrap your head around what global warming actually means without somebody explaining it. Whereas if you were able to brand it more as our effect on our climate, people tend to recognize it more for what you're meaning. Like that's the behavioral side of it, is just what I was kind of pointing out.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. And it all comes down to, if we had a properly functioning government, we could have an appropriately funded education system where we wouldn't have to try to try to teach people these things in the first place.
Yeah.
As adults.
Yeah, that's definitely a big one.